Now, with coverage you trust, this is 10 News Conference.
Governor Chafee's surprise announcement that he's not seeking re-election changes the playing field for the two likely Democratic candidates for governor next year. President Obama's plan to conduct a military strike in Syria is meeting with stiff opposition from the public and from many in Congress. And in a new segment on 10 News Conference called Wingmen, political reporter Bill Rapley hosts a debate on key issues with the two most prominent conservative and progressive bloggers in Rhode Island. Good morning, I'm Jim Chericani, along with our political reporter Bill Rapley. Our guests this week on 10 News Conference are Dr. Wendy Schiller of Brown University and NBC 10 political analyst. She'll be discussing Chafee's decision in our first segment, and then she'll be joined by Dr. Thomas Nichols, a professor at the Naval War College in Newport, to talk about the Syrian situation. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Wendy.
So, Chafee's decision, do you think it's possible that part of his decision-making involved the Chafee name? I remember covering the late John Chafee, and there was a time in the state that the Chafee name was political gold. And he's kind of muddied that up, whether it's his fault or not, over the past 3 years. Do you think his mother, who's still living, and Stephanie, his wife, talked about that too, along with other factors in making that decision?
I think it's entirely possible. I do think that we know that Lincoln Chafee is not a political fighter at heart. This is not what makes him get up in the morning and say, oh, I want to do political battle with people and I want to get nasty and I want to get rough and tumble. It's not his personality. So I think he looked at the poll numbers and he looked at his chances and he thought, if I do this, I won't be able to run the state at all. I won't really have the time to do what I want to get done. And frankly, he's had a long career and he doesn't really need the job of governor. It's not as if he's a career politician. And I think he didn't have the stomach or the heart for it. And you could tell he looked pretty relieved yesterday or 2 days ago when he announces, listen, I'm not going to have to go through this.
Not a fighter? I mean, this is a guy who went up against the Bush administration while he was a Republican senator. I mean, he is not backed down from...
When I say not a fighter, I mean the kind of political maneuvering, political strategic stuff, throwing mud at other people. He is principled. He stands for what he believes in, and he doesn't budge. But I don't think that's the same kind of sort of rough and tumble as we now will probably see between the two likely candidates that will run the Democratic Party.
His switch to become a Democrat, it kind of backfired on him, didn't it?
It did. It was a mistake. I thought it was a mistake at the time. I think that you can go from Republican to independent, particularly in Rhode Island, because Rhode Island Republicans are not really in sync with the National Republican Party, so it makes sense to people. But to go from Republican, independent, then to Democrat just suggests that you're confused and you don't have true party principles. And I think that was a problem for him. And I think he had some support in the Democratic constituency, but not enough to really make a run at people who had been Democrats all their lives.
Well, yeah, and they said he was hoping that the wallets would open from the Democratic supporters, and that apparently didn't happen.
I think there was some expectation that President Obama and the National Democrats would push donors his way and push them away from, let's say, Taveras and Raimondo, but that didn't really happen. I mean, I clearly had personal resources to run for governor, so I don't think the money was the issue, but contributing to a campaign is a signal of support, and if people aren't contributing, it means you don't really have the support. And I don't think he wanted to take people's money for any longer than he had to if he knew he wasn't going to run.
So now he's a lame duck. Is that a benefit or a hindrance to...
I think for Governor Chafee, it's actually a benefit in the sense that when he says he wants to do something, the voters will know that it's because he thinks it's in the best interest of the state. And that's a bit of a leverage, I think, with the state legislature. I'm not trying to win votes here. I'm trying to do what's best. And so if he takes advantage of the bully pulpit of the governorship, I think he can do a lot for Rhode Island. It would be ironic if he was a better communicator in the next year and a half than he's been prior because he's not running.
But he can also cut loose the unions.
What do you mean cut loose the unions?
I mean, he doesn't have to, for example, in the pension reform discussion, he doesn't have to give anything back to them anymore because he doesn't need their support.
I think, but I'm not as persuaded as other people that this was all about keeping their voting support. I think he worries about retirees. I think he worries about representation in the union debate because there's some element of the leadership is saying one thing, but the people who are actually at risk for losing benefits are saying another. I think he genuinely wants to work something out that would be the best for the state and the union, particularly the union retirees. So I know it was good for him politically, but I'm not sure that was his only motivation. That was a misstep in my opinion as well. You sign something, you sign something into law and you say this is our deal, and then you go back on it and say let's unravel it and negotiate.
That for sure was going to be a campaign commercial for Gina Raimondo.
Absolutely, and that suggests indecision, and so I think that was a mistake.
So the two likely Democratic candidates left, and they're supposedly going to announce in October, is Gina Raimondo, the general treasurer, and Mayor Angel Taveras out of Providence. You earlier on our station earlier this week said that Tavares probably gets some benefit out of Chafee dropping out because of the union support. Do you think that's going to be enough to push Tavares over the top, which will be in a tight race with Gina Raimondo?
I think today, no. I don't think it's clear that one person will win now, Tavares over Raimondo. I do think in the short term, we know public employee unions do not like Gina Raimondo very much these days.
That's an understatement.
Not just very much.
So
they want her
out. They want her out, right.
That support, I think, that was probably going with Chafee will now go for Tavares. But that can become a liability for Tavares if it's seen that he wants to unravel the pension deal or he's in their pocket or something like that. But I still think in the short term it gives him the advantage. But here's the advantage for Raimondo and Tavares together in that they're no longer running against the incumbent. The campaign won't be a referendum on Governor Chafee's performance. Now it's about what they will do, what they've already done in their office, what they'll do for the future of Rhode Island. It's almost better for the voters in the Democratic primary because they get a stronger sense of the vision of both candidates as opposed to talking about Chafee. Now we're really going to find out what would Tavares do, what would Raimondo do. Better for the voters, I think.
How does she win a primary that's dominated by unions and urban voters and you know, between the liberals, and I guess the liberals might split between Gina and Angel to some degree?
Oh, I mean, I think this is all about turnout, mobilization, and registration. There's a huge base of independents we know in Rhode Island right now. They can decide to register for the Democratic primary if they want to vote for Gina Raimondo and affiliate with the Democratic Party and then unaffiliate. She has a strategy, I think, which is to pull in particularly women, but also fiscally conservative independents into the Democratic primary. What she'll say is that Tavares isn't going to be as financially responsible or as good on the economy as she will be, and that will appeal to a lot of people. So in a straight Democratic primary today with only the people registered today, then I think Tavares has an edge.
But don't you think he's going to do much better with the Hispanic and minority vote? He just hired a fundraiser in Puerto Rico. He's going to Puerto Rico to talk about fundraising with this person. I mean, in the urban areas, he's got a leg up on that for sure, don't you think?
He's locked up the Latino vote.
I'm not as persuaded. I certainly think he has an advantage among Latinos. I mean, this is Gina Raimondo in an Italian, Portuguese, and Latino
but
state.
She speaks Spanish, and he is Hispanic. Right.
But I also think women are the sleeper. I keep saying this. Women are the sleeper vote in this primary. Women, particularly they're Latino women, she's polling pretty well among Latino women, and I think the idea of actually electing somebody in the Democrat primary who could win the general election as a woman. Mirth York ran some time ago as a Democrat, but this is a very exciting proposition for a lot of women, and there are women who supported Chafee for his very firm pro-choice stances. And those women are now up for grabs, particularly on the east side of Providence, but all over the state.
Well, they're both pro-choice candidates.
They are, but you know, when it comes down to sort of trusting the instincts of a woman versus a man, sometimes women who are single-issue voters pro-choice will go for the woman. So she's got some work to do ahead of time in this solidifying the women's vote. But if she can really generate enthusiasm among women, it will be a very tight race.
But to your point that they no longer have to battle against an incumbent, now they're setting their sights directly at each other. It's going to be nasty. And will this not wound them before the general election?
This is going to be a really interesting test of these sort of conventional wisdoms we have about American politics when a woman is in the race. When a woman is in the race, it's typically thought that the man can't get as down and dirty and nasty as he might if he was running against another man.
He could let third parties do it for
Right,
him.
we're going to see, but it's a small state. Your third parties are never that far away from your own candidacy. So we're going to see how nasty. They both say it won't get nasty. I think it will get very, very vigorous, but we'll see how nasty it gets.
We've got to take a break. Coming up in our next segment, Dr. Thomas Nichols from the Naval War College joins Dr. Schiller to talk about the president's plan to take military action in Syria. Welcome back to 10 News Conference. In this segment, we're talking with Dr. Thomas Nichols from the Navy War College in Newport and Dr. Wendy Schiller from Brown University. We're talking about the situation in Syria. Most of the polls show that about 80% of the American public is absolutely opposed to any military action in Syria. So if you're the president or you're the Congress, how do you go ahead and go forward with any military action when the American public is just not behind it?
Part of the problem is the way that polls are phrased. If you ask people generically, do you think we should engage in military action anywhere, as a hypothetical, people will always say no. The reverse is true if you ask them about something good. Do you think we should have a defense against nuclear missiles over the United States? People say, yes. And so I think a lot of it is the way that these questions are asked. And I think part of the problem is the way the administration took the case forward was to bring a hypothetical to the American people. If we were to do this, if we were to do that. And I think the average voter's inclination in that situation is simply to say, well, since there are so many unknowns, my default answer is to say no, rather than to say, look, I'm going to do this, and I'm asking for your approval to do the following thing, which is traditionally the way presidents have carried out the use of military force. So I think in some ways this was just a mishandled pass down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Congress, and again, asking Congress and the American people to kind of deal with the hypothetical, which they never want to do.
Is the key argument on a moral basis that gassing little children is a bad thing, or is it on a self-interest basis that the American interests are threatened by this kind of warfare?
I don't understand why those two questions are always posed in opposition to each other, that either it's in our interest or it's a moral issue. I think especially since the late 1990s, the United States and its Western partners have increasingly acted on the notion that our values are our interests and that we haven't tried to artificially divide those.
Is that case, can you make that case to the public? Do you think the public sees them as the same?
I think you can make that case. I think no one has.
Wendy, did the president kind of boot this whole thing by starting off with the red line remarks some time ago, kind of boxing himself into a corner, and now he feels for his credibility and the credibility of the country, he has to do something?
No, I think he always, I'm sure you can comment on this more. I think there's some, he has to do, I think he's always thought he has to do something. Right? I think President Obama feels that if there's a leader in the world, just as President Bush felt and believed, that is using chemical weapons, we have to stop that because other people will do that, whether they're leaders of nation states or other organizations. We have to do that. Now, the issue is Russia. A long time ago, we asked for a no-fly zone over Syria so that the Syrian army could not, blow up women and children and civilians. And Russia said no in the UN. And, you can really reflect on the Russian relationship with Syria, and that's a big obstacle for us. So I think part of this is to sort of toot our own horn with Russia. Listen, we're not going to let you stand in the way if we feel we need to do something in Syria. On the other hand, now it appears that he has not done a very good job of explaining to the American people why we need to do this.
He has yet to explain it to the American people.
He will next week, and he may not get the approval of Congress. I think he will get the approval of Congress. It might be very squeaky and not a big margin, but I think the question is limited involvement. And I think the American people, for the most part, believe that they didn't get the whole truth when we went to Iraq. And they're skeptical of this idea in Syria.
How much did the Iraq War put a bad taste in the minds of the American people about getting into another Middle East conflict?
The Iraq War was a decade ago. I think what the Iraq War is doing is giving cover to people who don't want to do this for a variety of reasons. Because this is not 2003. President Obama is not President Bush. This is not notional use of WMDs. This is a real use of WMDs. This is not OJ looking for the real killers. There really have been chemical weapons used. We know who used them. We know that there are real casualties.
Do we know who used them?
I don't think there's any doubt about that. Well, it's a part of a debate only in the kind of far corners of the internet where conspiracy theories still rule people's minds. And I think that 31 countries are pretty sure who did it. I think even the Russians are sure who did it. Wendy made the point that the Russians wouldn't let us have a no-fly zone. I think part of the problem is that we asked. In previous kinds of exercises of American and Western power, we simply didn't go around trying to get a yes from every country in the world, particularly Russia, which will always say no for its own reasons. And I think the case can be made. I think it is a moral case, but I think the window is closing because we are simply dithering and arguing about this too long.
You said that you think Congress will come around and give him support. How is that going to happen?
I think if it was a definite no, first of all, if the Speaker of the House, Boehner, thought there was no way this could happen, he would have said, listen, this isn't going to happen.
Yep.
I'm going to tell you right now it's not going to happen. I think he'll get it through the Senate. We know that the Senate Foreign Relations 10-7 with 3 Republicans voted for it. He'll get it through the Senate. It won't be filibustered. Maybe Rand Paul will try, but they'll shut it down. And then in the House, I think a coalition of sort of older, safer Republicans maybe and older, safer Democrats will join together. Part of it's presidential clout and power. The president doesn't have to do it. by the way. Congress can give him the authority, but then he can decide, well, Russia's going to help us
The
out.
Washington Post had a vote count just, I think, yesterday or today, and so far it's 204 no, and if there gets to 217 no, it's over.
No, it's not over because the president can twist some arms and
yeah.
put pressure and explain to people on Tuesday night, I guess.
I'm far less confident that this will survive the House. I think that's right, that he can get it through the Senate, although that one vote was an odd 10-7 vote with Senator Markey voting present for some reason.
Well, it's just a lack of courage on Senator Markey's point.
Well, and with three potential 2016 contenders all voting no, and I think the vote count in the House is would require something like Nancy Pelosi to keep all her Democrats together and still peel off something like 20 or 30 more Republican votes. I'm having a hard time seeing yet another Republican just this morning. Earlier this week just peeled off, and I just don't see it happening.
Will the president go without congressional approval?
I think he just said in Russia recently that he wouldn't. I never thought he had to go to Congress. When I worked in the Senate during the first Gulf War, I advised the senator I worked for, Senator Hines of Pennsylvania, not to go near the War Powers Resolution. I thought it was unconstitutional and dangerous. I think it was a mistake to take this down Pennsylvania Avenue. I disagree with Wendy to some extent. I think John Boehner would be more than happy to say the president wants his vote, let's give him his vote. And, up until now, the president's people have been saying Congress is the dog who caught the car, right? Congress has said, you have to come to us, you have to come to us. And the president sent it down Pennsylvania Avenue. I think there's a scenario under which John Boehner is saying, okay, you wanted to dump this in our lap? Well, let's see what happens now, since you're the dog who caught the car. And we're ping-ponging this back and forth, which is why I think that this intervention is dangerous. But Barbara Bodine, the ambassador to Iraq, after the war was over, said, she supported the operation, but she said there were 4 or 5 ways to do this thing right. There were 500 ways to do it wrong, and what she didn't count on is they were going to try all 500 ways first. What I'm worried about is that we're about to try all 500 ways first.
Wendy, a purely political question. If we go into Syria, and it actually...
Now, when we say go into, let's be careful.
Make a military strike.
Physically, we're not going to send troops into Syria.
But the missiles or whatever we do,
right.
whatever military action we take, and it escalates. Now you have a Democratic president that gets us involved in another conflict, and Hillary Clinton's on the horizon. What does it do for her possibility of getting elected?
I think it will hurt Hillary Clinton if there's a conflict that's escalated by President Obama. I don't think President Obama cares, actually, if it hurts Hillary Clinton's chances. I think that relationship is pretty theatrical. But let me just say that there is the possibility that we bluster and we stall, and I agree with you on this, but that puts Putin, the president of Russia, in a position of getting rid of Assad of Syria. Somehow the Russians say, you have to go. You're either going to get killed like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, or you have to go, and maybe trying to find a way to broker some sort of peace in this interim period. That seems to me something that could emerge from our bluster and then this delay with Congress. But listen, you can't gas little children and women, civilians. We are the United States of America. If we can stop it, we have a moral, I think, obligation to do that. And maybe this won't be a profile in courage, but we have to think bigger than ourselves here.
Got about a minute left.
Why is it in Russia's interest to get rid of Assad?
At this point, I don't think it is. I think Russian foreign policy at this point has devolved to a day in which you've annoyed the president of the United States is a day in which you've earned your pay as the president of Russia. I really think things have gotten to that frosty level. I agree completely. This is a moral issue. This is something we should have done. Frankly, I was arguing for this kind of an intervention a year and a half ago. I thought we should have done this 100,000 deaths ago. But the worst of all worlds is to go into this the way we seem to be going into it, which is with a completely divided internal political situation. I still hope that we step forward and can pick up that mantle of leadership and make that strong moral case. I'm increasingly worried that we're not going to do that.
And we're out of time for this segment. Thank you both for joining us. Coming up next on 10 News Conference, a new segment, a debate on current topics with Bill Rapley and the Wingmen.
You can watch this program again on our website, turnto10.com. We also have an archive of past programs. Click on Politics.
Welcome back to 10 News Conference. In this segment, we're going to take a look at one of the week's hot topics from the two ends of the political spectrum. From the right wing, Justin Katz, the editor of Ocean State Current website. From the left wing, Bob Plain from Rhode Island Future. They will be our weekly guests in this segment known as the Wingmen. Gentlemen, Thanks for coming in. This week, Governor Chafee said he will not be running for re-election. So I wanted to get your assessment, Justin, from the right wing as to what you think of the governor's performance so far.
Well, let's just say for the state's good, it's a positive that he's not going to be in a race. Whether that ends up being a good thing for the political battle for governorship, I think that remains to be seen. But overall, I'd say you'll need only know that Rhode Island is the only state that lost population for 2 years in a row in the first 2 years of his term, to know that this has been a disastrous period for the governor.
But it didn't happen to the previous governor? That people weren't moving out of the state when Don Carcieri was in charge?
Not in this sequential, consistent way. The unemployment has dropped mainly because people are quitting and giving up. The state's economy has grown at less than half the rate of the state's budget. These are all indications that the governor hasn't been a very good steward of the state.
Well, Bob, over there on the left, what do you think? Has Governor Chafee been a disgrace?
No, not at all. I think, speaking of former Governor Carcieri, I think Governor Chafee has done a really good job with the really bad hand that Carcieri left for him. So, I don't know. I don't think anyone could have done any better job.
Well, what can you point to that is positive out of Lincoln Chafee's tenure so far?
Well, I mean, our economy is getting better. Our economy is actually improving more than it was improving when his predecessor was in office. I think he's actually cleaning up the mess that Carcieri left for him.
But compared to our neighbors, is that economic growth?
No. If you look at employment, Rhode Island is the second farthest from its peak of any state in the country. That means that every state saw a recession, and then mainly during Governor Chafee's term, we've had the recovery, supposedly, and Rhode Island has gained the least amount of ground. Compared to Massachusetts and Rhode Island, Connecticut, we're off the charts on employment.
So what's he done wrong? I'm not sure that you can lay this all at his doorstep, can you?
Well, to a large degree, it's that he hasn't done anything. And we've sort of dug in with Rhode Island's method of budget by budget, no big ideas, no real changes to ease the economy or the tax structure. Taxes have increased. The state portion of the budget has gone up 5 to 7% in his first 2 years of his term.
38 studios was a big idea. How'd that one go?
But compared to 5% growth in the state's multi-billion-dollar budget, even that piece, we waste. If you look at the waste and fraud in government, if you look at overtime for employees, that's a 38 studios 5 times over every single year. That's a catchy one because it's got a title, 38 Studios, and it's got a famous baseball player involved. But it's really a relatively minor consideration when you look at a governor.
And we didn't have to do that one. We do have to pay people over.
Well, I disagreed with 38 Studios to begin with. So I guess you got me there. But I think it's dwarfed by the rest of things that a governor's supposed to do, which is run the state, which is not getting done well.
Has the governor been effective at bringing the legislature over to any of the plans that he has suggested in order to make the economy work better?
No, and in fact, that's one of the areas that I think Link Chafee could have done better. I don't think he has that dynamic personality that modern politics really requires. So I don't think he did a great job of kind of building a coalition. But for my money, I'd really rather deal with a principled person and a fast-talking politician. I think most Rhode Islanders agree with that.
Well, but do you think that he went off the tracks when he spent political capital on an evergreen in the State House Rotunda that he didn't want to call a Christmas tree, or a legal case on the death penalty that was out of his hands anyway?
No, I think that was the three of us that went off the track with that stuff. All Governor Chafee did was follow what Governor Carcieri did. And for some reason, the people in the media, us, we gave him a hard time about it when we didn't give Governor Carcieri a hard time about it.
And it's sort of like what he's remembered for. We only have about 25 seconds left, Justin. But
well, Governor Chafee, far from building coalitions, has been needlessly divisive and ideological, which is part of why Bob likes him, I think. But,
all right. We're going to have to leave it on that. Thanks very much for joining us. That's the Wingmen. We will have them every week here on 10 News Conference. Thanks for watching.